Ahoy! It's your buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Night Games. This month, the code is Arcana, and it's a long one. It's running from now all the way through September 14th, and it's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, online or in person. Arcana is the code. And let's face it, everybody, it's summertime. It's fun time. It's time to get back together with your friends and family, maybe do some grilling and chilling and ripping some board games or tabletop RPGs. And for all your tabletop RPGs, board games, dice, and Magic the Gathering needs, look no further than Noble Night Games. Noble Night also has a killer trading program, so if you need to free up a little space on your shelf and add a little cash to your wallet so you can buy more games, Noble Night is where it's at. And there's more details on that on their website. In the meantime, the code is Arcana, good from now all the way through September 14th from our friends over at Noble Night Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He's never gotten lost in a maze because he's seen The Shining, Stu Horvath.
I don't go in mazes because I've seen The Shining.
That's what I'm saying, man. I love the idea of a hedge mage, but I've seen too many people get decapitated in them in movies to ever want to set foot in one. Like, I have a list of places that I won't go, and thankfully Sally's aligned with me on this. Not into the woods, not on a cruise, not to an island, never into a hedge mage. Like, we are very particular about places that we are not willing to die or be murdered.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned this because when we had our friend Sean's bachelor party up in the Catskills, where the rental house was, there's a mansion nearby that has a hedge maze that has a statue of a Minotaur in the middle of it. And it's private land. And like you could kind of hike to it and get there accidentally. But I was trying to get permission for us to all kind of like go over there. And, you know, because then we would all died in a horror movie because that Minotaur statue was totally going to come to life and kill us all.
You know, if there is going to be something that kills you in the middle of a mage, it better be a Minotaur, you know? And honestly, back then I was still drinking, so I definitely would have gone in that hedge mage. But now that I'm 3 years sober, I know better.
There was a brief discussion about like trying to find it at night. And it was just like, no, this is all just going to go terribly, terribly wrong.
Like, you probably will get killed in the hedge mage during the day. You will definitely get killed in the hedge mage if you go in at night. But I digress. Stu, we're talking about a book called
Maze. It's subtitled Solve the World's Most Challenging Puzzle. And it was written and illustrated by Christopher Manson back in the year 1985.
Ooh.
Yeah. There's a whole subgenre of books like this that are sort of armchair treasure hunts. Of them, I find Maze to be the most interesting and enduring, but there's other ones that have like strange stories attached to them. I think the first one was called Masquerade, and it was in England. And there was like the prize, there's a prize attached to it. So it's like a book with lots of art that's cryptic and has bunches of hints built into it. And you have to, solve a central riddle. And solving that central riddle in the case of Masquerade would lead you to a location where there is literal buried treasure. I think Masquerade was like a gold filigree rabbit that sort of was like thematic with the book.
Right.
That one has like all this scandal attached to it because like the guy who finds it, he wins it, but he used a pseudonym. And when it was revealed who he was actually, turns out that he was dating the ex of the guy who made the book. So like there was some sneaky dealing to get that. There's another one.
See, that wouldn't have happened nowadays because in the modern times, that dude would have either had his ex sign an NDA or had her killed. I heard it both ways.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And just like the internet makes that kind of sneakery really hard. There's another one that involved an owl. I think it was like the mystery of the golden owl. And like nobody figured that one out. And it's still the guy who wrote it, who gave the solution to his lawyers. So after he died, they could execute the thing if somebody found it. And there's like this big golden owl that's attached to it. So the guy who made the golden owl was like, yeah, the hell with this. Like, nobody's going to solve this thing. I'm going to take this owl and I'm going to sell it. People got upset about it and brought him to court and stopped the sale. There's all these weird things that happen with these armchair treasure hunts that make them interesting in a different way than Maze.
How scandalous.
Right? It's pretty wild. Most of these things have puzzles that are just so hard and so obtuse that it's very difficult to kind of fathom them. They're like difficult for difficulty's sake, which makes sense because like you're putting it in a book and you're expecting a whole bunch of people to compete for a cash prize. Maze had a $10,000 cash prize. That was it. No hidden treasure. And the idea was that you had to get to the middle of this maze and then back, find like the optimal path. And then there's also a central riddle. The book is basically structured like a kind of like a choose your own adventure book. There's 45 entries. Each is one, small piece of text, and beside it is a full page illustration. And you navigate the maze by using the doors and the illustrations, all of which have a number on them, which corresponds to a page number. So it works very much like a pick your own path adventure game book in that way. And all of the illustrations are very much like first person shooter view. It's definitely like your vision looking at this really strange room packed with oddities. The text is actually a little bit creepy for a book that I feel was sort of at least tangentially intended for kids. I definitely get the feeling that there's a guide who's talking to you the entire time, and he's definitely the Minotaur, and he might be leading you to your death.
As a Minotaur should.
Yeah, that's the sort of the thing that really rehooked me as an adult. There's like this darkness, and it's really extremely well done and subtle. As a kid, I didn't even have this book. Kid in elementary school had the book and let me borrow it for a day. And I was just so entranced by the art. It's so enigmatic. It reminds me a lot of Edward Gorey in a lot of ways.
Right.
It's not quite black and white. Everything it's all ink drawings, but they're on like a cream colored background, which I find warm and inviting. Contrasts with like the strangeness of the spaces. There's this great one I just opened up to. It's room 26. It's like a theater, and like there's like all these mechanical devils flying around like a stage universe. It's so good. Lots of enigmatic things to encounter. It feels like there's a heavy atmosphere to it. Like you feel like you could hear somebody has just left any of these rooms. There's just like a sense of like I just missed somebody here, which is a really powerful feeling to get out of an illustration and some text.
That is insane.
Yeah. And the more you kind of wander, the more intense I feel like that feel. It's a very immersive feeling, and it's a really effective book. I think of this book whenever I'm thinking about dungeons. I think about this book. I think that there's something just informative about having, navigated this book. Dungeons and Dungeons and Dragons and other games are very surreal, unreal spaces, and this gets to that without being a D&D book or connected to role-playing games at all, in a way that I think is just super valuable for anybody who's like looking to design that. It's ridiculous. This isn't a real space. There's no one would build this. No one would put this stuff there. If you were confronted with it in real life, it just doesn't work. It's more like a dream space, like a David Lynch movie.
That's cool.
And that's kind of true of dungeons and role-playing games, especially Dungeons and Dragons. They don't make like sense in a realistic way. It's like a mythic space. And yeah, and this book kind of taps it without being a D&D book. And I just think it's super valuable for that. $10,000 cash prize. They actually extended the deadline. There was a deadline attached to it, and nobody ever figured out the riddle. I don't think anybody still has figured out the riddle, but the optimal path through the maze to the center and back has been figured out. It was figured out by 12 people in 1987. They got to split the money basically at the deadline. They were just like, well, you guys came closest and you're all at the same spot. So here's all, just split it evenly, which is, not bad.
Listen, almost $1,000 a person in 1987 money is a lot of money.
Yeah. That's a pretty good day. And honestly, like, took me a long time to figure it out. I had the book briefly as a kid, and then I got it again. It took a long time for me to figure out what the thing was. It was just like this weird, like, dream book that I had, almost like trying to track down a book you had in a nightmare. But I did eventually figure out what it was, probably in like the early 2000s when I was working at the Daily News. And I had it was like my downtime book at work for a couple of years. And then I finally cracked it. Oh no, it was even earlier than that. I had this at the photo lab, and it was definitely my down because I have the maps. Because Manson describes it less as a book than a house in book form. And that's very much true. You could map it out, and I have my maps. It's just cool that you could do that. But it took forever to figure it out, multiple years. And there's a tricky bit about halfway through the path that once I figured it out, I felt like the smartest person in the world, and while simultaneously feeling so angry at Christopher Manson for having done that to me and like messed with me in that way. It was quite good.
Yeah, it had to feel good. That had to feel like super good after spending years on something and finally like cracking the code. By the way, with the inflation calculator, I just pulled it out. 10 grand in 87 would be 26 grand today. So,
all right, yeah,
they all did pretty good for themselves back then when they found this. My takeaways from this is that I think it's impressive that he put something out there into the world that challenged people. It's a game, but it's something that challenged people and it gave them something to strive for. And maybe some people, it actually gave them a purpose that they might not have had previous to this, and they spent years trying to figure this out. So, how much was the book when you bought it?
$11.
So for $11, you got literal years worth of pleasure and fun. That's crazy. That is something that you will be hard pressed to find in life anymore. Something you're going to get for just over $10 that you're going to get years worth of experiences out of.
It's true.
So Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Maze?
Just that I have, I've solved the optimal path. I have no idea what the answer to the riddle is. Like, I have a glimmer. It has something to do with Shakespeare, I think, but like, that's it. And that's very much my feeling about. I had another couple of these. Merlin's Mystery is another one that came out in like the 90s. Like this, they come out like every 5 years or so. Somebody thinks it's a good idea. And Maze's Puzzle is a really good example of sort of like you can kind of glimpse it if you stare at it long enough and just enough to know I'm never going to figure that out. Like, cause it's just, you could just tell that it's too obtuse. It requires you to be the author of the puzzle to solve it, I think.
I don't know, man. Sounds like that's the exact reason you had a child, because you could start Jer on this really early. Because you came to it later. You came to it like you got it when you were how old?
I was in like 4th grade.
Right. So you're giving him like a solid like 6-year head start on you.
Oh yeah, I mean when I was when I started in earnest, yeah, no, I was in my 20s. So like yeah, like
exactly. This is some national treasure shit, yo. I mean, you could get him in on the ground floor of this, and by the time he's in his mid-20s, maybe he'll have solved it because he'll be doing it with you. He'll be doing it with Dad's help. Oh man, I'm loving this.
But there's no prize money anymore.
But it's the journey, man. it's the journey.
Jared, get in here.
So this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
They could find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I posted Maze a couple years old now, but try and dig it up because the illustrations, Manson's illustrations, are fantastic. And I think there was a video game version of it by Interplay, maybe, but I don't like that as much. I think that it's color graphics, if I recall correctly. Get the book. It's like $10 on Amazon, like whatever.
Yeah, and you get years of enjoyment out of it, or you get frustrated and have to go back to it a bunch of times.
Either way,
you can find me on the internet at John McGuire RPG, on the Twitter, on the Instagram, and on the TikTok. I post mostly on the Instagram, and I'm promoting things more because right now I have a Kickstarter rocking and rolling. It is called The Devil in New Jersey. I'm launching it for Zine Quest on the 4th of August. It's going to run for 2 weeks. It is a found footage horror RPG for 3-2-1 action that takes place, of course, in New Jersey. If you're interested in 3-2-1 action books, you can get them over at Exalted Funeral. They got the stock that I don't have in my basement. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you love the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We got early release episodes. We got a behind the scenes look at 3-2-1 action. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book called Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from D&D to Mothership. And yes, week 2, I remembered that I took the screenshot and it's in my notes. Next week and beyond, can't promise anything. You can also join in on a patron game that we're going to be running over on our Discord. I'm running DCC. I'm going to run Chill in October. We got some other cool stuff going on. A Discord community, by the way, that is superb that we would love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.